The story of World War II is filled with moments when the world seemed to pause, holding its breath as decisions made in distant rooms and on devastated front lines reshaped the future of entire nations. In these shadows, humanity discovered both its darkest depths and its most unbreakable resolve, leaving behind lessons that still echo through every corner of the modern world. World War II unfolded as a colossal struggle that drew countless nations into a conflict so vast and transformative that it reshaped global politics, redefined military strategy, and forced humanity to confront the consequences of ambition, ideology, and power on a scale never seen before, making each decisive moment a turning point that altered the trajectory of the 20th century. As the war progressed across continents and oceans, every choice made by leaders, every unexpected shift on the battlefield, and every technological or strategic breakthrough became a thread in a much larger tapestry, ultimately creating a legacy whose influence continues to shape modern society, international relations, and collective memory long after the final shots were fired. The early years of World War II unfolded under the weight of uncertainty as nations struggled to understand the scale and speed of the conflict spreading across continents. The German strategy of blitzkrieg unleashed a form of warfare so rapid and coordinated that established military doctrines were shattered within months. Diplomats, generals, and entire governments found themselves grappling with a type of military momentum that erased borders faster than they could respond. This accelerating collapse of traditional defenses plunged Europe into a new era defined by urgency, fear, and the relentless advance of an enemy determined to reshape the global order. When German forces swept through Poland in 1939, they demonstrated that mechanized warfare had transformed the meaning of invasion and resistance forever. Tanks, aircraft, and infantry moved with precision that overwhelmed both strategic planning and national confidence. As Poland fell, observers across Europe realized that hesitation and outdated doctrines had become liabilities that no nation could afford. The shock of this early defeat reverberated through diplomatic chambers, convincing many that the coming years would be defined by speed, innovation, and the willingness to adapt under extraordinary pressure. The invasion of France in 1940 intensified the sense of dread as Europe watched one of its strongest military powers crumble in a matter of weeks. Despite expectations of a long and grueling conflict, France was unable to withstand the combination of German coordination and tactical surprise that bypassed traditional defensive lines. The collapse sent shockwaves through Allied nations, revealing that political assumptions about strength and preparedness were not enough to counter modernized warfare. This turning point marked the moment when the balance of power shifted dramatically, forcing survivors to rethink their strategies for the battles ahead. Dunkirk emerged from this chaos as both a desperate retreat and a symbol of resilience that would later shape the Allied mindset in unexpected ways. Although the evacuation was not a strategic victory, the survival of thousands of soldiers restored a measure of hope to a continent on the brink of defeat. Britain recognized that its ability to continue the fight depended on protecting the human core of its army, rather than clinging to territory already lost. That realization allowed the nation to reorganize, strengthen its defenses, and prepare for an extended struggle that demanded unwavering determination and resolve. The Battle of Britain soon became a test of endurance and national will as the German Luftwaffe attempted to crush the last major Western democracy standing against the Axis expansion. Air warfare gained new significance as radar systems, coordinated defenses, and rapid interception strategies shifted the balance from brute force to technological ingenuity. Britain's survival demonstrated that modern conflicts would be shaped not only by armies, but also by the strategic use of information and innovation. This successful defense marked the first major interruption of German momentum and proved that resilience, adaptation, and tactical intelligence could alter the course of the war. As Europe burned, Hitler's attention turned toward the Soviet Union, leading to the monumental decision to launch Operation Barbarossa in June 1941. This invasion opened the largest front of the war and exposed Germany to a conflict far more brutal, unpredictable, and resource-intensive than its planners had anticipated. The vast terrain, harsh climate, and fierce Soviet resistance challenged the assumptions that had driven previous victories. As the advance slowed, Germany discovered that its ambitions exceeded its logistical capabilities, setting the stage for a grinding struggle that would eventually drain its strength. Operation Barbarossa initially produced rapid territorial gains, but those successes masked the profound strategic miscalculations underlying the invasion. German forces underestimated both the scale of Soviet industrial capacity and the willingness of the Soviet population to mobilize. In defense of their homeland, The early victories created a sense of overconfidence that blinded German leadership to the depth of the challenge they faced as they approached major Soviet cities. This misjudgment allowed the Soviet Union to regroup, strengthen its defenses, and transform the conflict into one of attrition that Germany was increasingly unprepared to sustain. The failure to capture Moscow before winter became one of the most consequential turning points of the early war, reshaping the momentum Germany had relied upon. Bitter cold, inadequate supplies, and exhausted troops halted the advance just as Soviet reinforcements arrived to launch a powerful counter. This reversal shattered the myth of German invincibility and signaled that the Eastern Front would become the war's most decisive battleground. The consequences reverberated through German command, revealing that ambition without preparation could lead to devastating strategic vulnerability. While these events unfolded in Europe, Japan pursued its own expansion, driven by resource shortages and a desire to secure dominance in the Pacific. Tensions with the United States intensified as diplomatic negotiations failed to resolve economic restrictions that threatened Japanese military objectives. Japanese leadership concluded that only a bold and decisive strike could prevent American interference in their territorial ambitions. This belief set in motion a chain of events that would transform the global landscape and bring new powers into the center of the conflict. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 became the catalyst for a dramatic shift in the war's trajectory, pulling the United States into the conflict with unprecedented unity and determination. Although the strike inflicted significant damage on the Pacific Fleet, it failed to destroy the American industrial and logistical capacity that would soon become the backbone of Allied strength. The attack awakened a nation that had long debated its role in global affairs, ending isolationist tendencies and fueling a massive mobilization effort. With the United States now fully committed, the balance of industrial power tipped decisively against the Axis, ensuring that the conflict would expand in both scope and intensity. As the United States entered the war and the Soviet Union began to recover on the Eastern Front, the world moved toward a new phase in which Allied cooperation became increasingly crucial. The early shadows of uncertainty gave way to a clear understanding that victory would depend on long-term endurance, strategic coordination, and the ability to manage multiple fronts simultaneously. Nations that once stood isolated began to recognize that their survival depended on shared intelligence, synchronized campaigns, and collective sacrifice. This evolving unity laid the foundation for a counteroffensive that would gradually challenge Axis dominance and reshape the global order in ways that defined the remainder of the 20th century. As the war progressed into its middle years, the Axis powers began to confront the reality that early victories had created: overextended supply lines and unsustainable commitments across vast regions. The Soviet Union, once reeling from the initial shock of invasion, gradually transformed its defense into a coordinated and disciplined pushback supported by colossal industrial output. Factories relocated deep into the interior produced weapons, tanks, and aircraft at a pace unmatched by German production, shifting the balance of endurance toward the Red Army. This overwhelming industrial resurgence became a hidden force behind the battlefield momentum that would soon reshape the strategic landscape of the conflict. The Battle of Stalingrad emerged as the defining struggle of this period, symbolizing both the brutality of the Eastern Front and the turning tide of the war. German forces entered the city expecting a swift victory, but they were met with fierce Soviet resistance that turned every street and structure into a contested battlefield. As the fighting intensified, German divisions became increasingly pinned down, unable to advance or retreat effectively. This attrition signaled the beginning of a strategic reversal that neither side could ignore, marking Stalingrad as one of the most consequential engagements of the 20th century. When Soviet forces launched Operation Uranus, the encirclement of the German Sixth Army changed the war's trajectory by trapping an entire force that had once symbolized Germany's military prowess. Supplies dwindled, morale collapsed, and the winter cold compounded the desperation of soldiers now cut off from any realistic chance of rescue. Despite pleas from commanders on the ground, German leadership refused to authorize a breakout, insisting that holding the city was vital for political and symbolic reasons. This catastrophic decision resulted in the surrender of tens of thousands of soldiers, shattering the myth of German invincibility and strengthening Soviet resolve. In the wake of Stalingrad, the Eastern Front became a battleground defined by massive offensives, larger troop formations, and increasingly sophisticated strategies on both sides. The Soviet Union began to seize the strategic initiative, launching coordinated operations that targeted German positions along a wide front. German forces found themselves responding reactively, attempting to stabilize lines that could no longer be held with diminishing resources. This shift marked a significant psychological change as the war's momentum moved steadily in favor of the Allies, signaling that time was no longer on the side of the Axis powers. While the Eastern Front consumed vast resources, North Africa became another critical theater where the future of the conflict was being decided. German and Italian forces, under the command of Erwin Rommel, initially achieved dramatic advances that threatened British control of key supply routes in the Mediterranean. However, logistical constraints, fuel shortages, and increasing Allied reinforcements gradually neutralized the tactical advantages Rommel had relied upon. The Second Battle of El Alamein marked a decisive shift, proving that Axis momentum could be halted and reversed in a region vital to global trade and military strategy. El Alamein not only secured British positions, but also paved the way for the Allied invasion of North Africa, known as Operation Torch, which brought American forces into direct engagement with the Axis on the continent. This collaboration between British and American armies demonstrated a new level of Allied cooperation that would become essential in the later stages of the war. As the Axis powers were pushed out of North Africa, the Mediterranean region shifted firmly under Allied influence, opening pathways for future invasions into southern Europe. This victory strengthened morale and reinforced the belief that coordinated multinational operations could produce lasting strategic gains. With North Africa secured, the Allies turned their attention to Italy. Believing that removing Mussolini's regime would weaken German influence and force the Axis to defend multiple fronts simultaneously, the invasion of Sicily demonstrated the effectiveness of amphibious assaults supported by overwhelming air superiority, allowing Allied forces to gain control of the island with fewer losses than anticipated. The subsequent overthrow of Mussolini and Italy's armistice with the Allies created both opportunities and complications as Germany scrambled to fill the vacuum. This campaign forced Germany to divert troops from the Eastern Front, weakening its ability to maintain pressure against the advancing Red Army. Meanwhile, the Western Allies intensified their efforts to erode German capabilities through strategic bombing campaigns targeting industrial centers, transportation networks, and military infrastructure. Factories producing aircraft, vehicles, and weapons faced relentless attacks that demanded constant repairs and forced Germany to shift resources toward air defense. These bombings strained the German economy, disrupted troop movements, and limited the ability to replace losses sustained on the Eastern and Mediterranean fronts. Although controversial, the sustained pressure contributed to the long-term decline of Axis military production and weakened their capacity to sustain prolonged conflict. In the Pacific Theater, the United States and its allies were achieving their own pivotal victories, beginning with the Battle of Midway, where American code-breaking and strategic foresight neutralized Japan's offensive capability. The destruction of key Japanese carriers shifted naval supremacy to the United States, altering the balance of power across the Pacific. As the island-hopping campaign progressed, American forces captured strategically significant islands that brought them closer to the Japanese mainland while cutting off vital supply lines. These advances forced Japan into a defensive posture, diminishing its ability to project power and weakening its capacity to maintain control over occupied territories. The island-hopping strategy demonstrated the importance of controlling airfields, logistical hubs, and naval routes, allowing the Allies to bypass heavily fortified islands while isolating Japanese forces. Each gain provided new bases from which bombers and naval fleets could extend their reach, steadily tightening the noose around Japan's defensive perimeter. The combination of amphibious assaults, naval bombardments, and air support revealed a level of operational integration that pushed Allied capabilities to new heights. As Japan's strategic options narrowed, the Allies prepared for the final stages of a campaign that would eventually bring them to the threshold of the Japanese homeland. Across all these theaters, the mid-war years revealed that the Axis powers were increasingly unable to sustain the aggressive expansion that had defined their early successes. The growing strength of Allied cooperation, coupled with expanding industrial output in the United States and Soviet Union, created an overwhelming force that no single Axis nation could match. As the balance of power continued to shift, the Allies recognized that victory would now depend on maintaining pressure across multiple fronts simultaneously. This realization set the stage for the massive operations that would follow, shaping the final chapters of the conflict and preparing the world for a decisive transformation in the global order. By the final phase of World War II, the Allies had achieved the strategic initiative across Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific, leaving the Axis struggling to maintain cohesion. Germany faced relentless pressure from the Soviet Union in the East while contending with the anticipated Allied invasion in the West. The cumulative effect of attrition, resource shortages, and sustained bombing campaigns had eroded both morale and combat effectiveness. This convergence of military, economic, and psychological pressure created conditions in which decisive Allied operations could finally determine the outcome of the conflict. The planning and execution of D-Day in June 1944 exemplified the meticulous coordination necessary to achieve a breakthrough in Western Europe. Amphibious landings, airborne operations, and deception campaigns were synchronized to maximize surprise and minimize initial losses. The invasion forced Germany to defend multiple fronts simultaneously, stretching resources and weakening defensive positions along critical sectors. D-Day's success not only established a Western foothold, but also demonstrated the transformative power of strategic planning, combined with industrial and military capacity. Following the establishment of the Normandy beachhead, Allied forces advanced through France with remarkable speed, liberating cities and disrupting German communication and supply lines. The collapse of German control over occupied territories revealed the fragility of the Axis position when confronted with coordinated, multinational forces. As liberation progressed, the impact on civilian populations became evident, with returning governments attempting to restore order while addressing the humanitarian consequences of occupation. These operations highlighted that victory required not only battlefield success, but also strategic management of liberated territories. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union capitalized on the German decline, conducting massive offensives that pushed Axis forces westward toward Berlin. Soviet armies employed combined arms, tactics, overwhelming German positions, and capturing key cities with increasing efficiency. The momentum generated by these campaigns demonstrated that Germany's strategic reserves had been depleted and that the initiative had permanently shifted. These advances foreshadowed the final collapse of the European Axis powers, illustrating the cumulative effect of sustained pressure across multiple fronts. The Allied bombing campaigns intensified as forces closed in on Germany, targeting industrial centers, transportation networks, and civilian infrastructure to degrade the enemy's ability to continue the fight. Factories producing military equipment, railways transporting supplies, and energy plants essential to war production became primary objectives. The resulting disruptions strained German logistics, slowed troop movements, and further demoralized both soldiers and civilians. These operations, combined with ground advances, ensured that Germany could no longer recover from the systematic erosion of its capabilities. In the Pacific, the United States steadily advanced toward Japan using the island-hopping strategy, gradually isolating Japanese strongholds while gaining critical bases for future operations. Battles such as Iwo Jima and Okinawa demonstrated the intensity of resistance Japan could muster even as the strategic situation worsened. American forces relied on overwhelming firepower, careful planning, and logistical coordination to secure these islands despite significant casualties. Each victory brought Allied forces closer to the Japanese mainland, making the prospect of a decisive invasion increasingly viable. The prospect of a mainland invasion, combined with a relentless air campaign, placed Japan in an untenable strategic position by mid-1945. Industrial production was severely restricted, supply lines were cut, and civilian populations faced shortages of food, medicine, and essential resources. These factors weakened Japan's capacity to sustain conventional defense while increasing the pressure on leadership to find a solution that could prevent total collapse. The cumulative effects of prolonged conflict demonstrated the devastating efficiency of coordinated, multi-theater Allied strategies. The use of atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki marked the ultimate turning point in the Pacific, ending the war in a manner that reshaped global politics and military strategy. The destruction caused by these bombings compelled Japan to surrender, illustrating the dramatic consequences of technological innovation when combined with strategic necessity beyond immediate military impact. The introduction of nuclear weapons initiated a new era in international relations and warfare, signaling a permanent shift in global power dynamics. These events underscored that decisive moments in warfare are often determined not only by numbers and tactics, but also by innovation and calculated risk. As Germany and Japan capitulated, the world entered a period of reflection on the cost, consequences, and lessons of global conflict. Millions of soldiers and civilians had perished, cities had been destroyed, and entire economies were left in ruins. The Allies faced the task of rebuilding while simultaneously establishing institutions and alliances to prevent the recurrence of such devastation. This period of reconstruction highlighted that victory required not only military success, but also foresight in establishing political, economic, and social stability. The establishment of the United Nations and the division of influence into spheres of power reflected an effort to address the structural vulnerabilities exposed by the war. Former enemies and allies alike recognized that collaboration, diplomacy, and international oversight were essential for long-term peace. The agreements reached in the immediate post-war years laid the foundation for both the Cold War and subsequent global cooperation efforts. These outcomes demonstrated that the decisive moments of the war extended far beyond battlefield victories, shaping international order for decades to come. Ultimately, the final phase of World War II revealed the interconnected nature of global conflict, showing how decisions in one theater could influence outcomes across the world. Allied coordination, industrial capacity, technological innovation, and strategic foresight collectively determined the trajectory of the war. Each turning point, from Stalingrad to D-Day and from Midway to Hiroshima, contributed to a cascading series of outcomes that redefined military, political, and social paradigms. The war's conclusion emphasized that understanding history requires attention to the cumulative impact of decisive moments that continue to influence the modern world. The decisive moments of World War II reshaped not only nations, but also the very fabric of global power and human understanding. Every choice, every battle, and every technological breakthrough reverberated far beyond the battlefield, leaving legacies that still define international relations today. The staggering scale of destruction revealed the cost of unchecked ambition and ideological extremism, forcing humanity to confront the consequences of warfare on a global scale. Societies learned that victory is measured not only by military success, but also by the ability to rebuild, reconcile, and establish lasting institutions for peace. The Eastern Front, D-Day, and the Pacific campaigns illustrate how strategy, endurance, and cooperation determined outcomes that seemed impossible at the time. These moments underscore that wars are won by sustained effort, decisive planning, and the ability to adapt under pressure. The human toll, reflected in millions of deaths and displaced populations, highlighted the fragility of life amid geopolitical ambition. This reality reinforced the importance of international frameworks and alliances designed to prevent repetition of such catastrophic events. Technological innovations, from radar to nuclear weapons, demonstrated that progress can redefine both the methods and the stakes of conflict. These developments forced nations to reconsider the ethical, strategic, and societal implications of warfare in a rapidly changing world. The liberation of occupied nations and the defeat of Axis powers underscored the impact of unity, resilience, and coordination among allied forces. The war's outcome proved that cooperation across borders is essential when confronting threats that exceed the capabilities of any single nation. In the aftermath, institutions such as the United Nations and international agreements sought to create a more stable global order. The lessons of World War II emphasized the need for diplomacy, dialogue, and mechanisms for accountability in preserving peace. World War II also reshaped cultural memory, influencing literature, film, and education for generations. The stories of courage, sacrifice, and resilience serve as enduring reminders of the human capacity to endure even the darkest periods of history. The shadows of the 20th century continue to influence geopolitics, economics, and social structures in the 21st century. Understanding these decisive moments allows humanity to recognize both the potential for destruction and the power of cooperation, foresight, and moral responsibility. Ultimately, the history of World War II teaches that every action, whether on the battlefield or in the corridors of power, carries consequences that ripple through time. Remembering these events ensures that the lessons of resilience, strategy, and shared humanity guide the decisions of today and tomorrow.